Thank you. Sophia. Can you hear me okay? Is it, yeah? Okay, good. I'm going to present about this new initiative, and it's a continuation of the past initiative, the Veaugh-Geiss. I have a lot of resources in the slides. If you want to download them, there's a QR code. You can also get it from the repository, and I'll come back to this at the end. Um, So we started this new initiative, and before I go into detail, it's already been referenced several times in several of the talks that were amazing yesterday from Nicole, Cornelius, and Joanna. Um, but before I get started, I usually like to ask the public a couple of questions, and I'm not going to skip that today. So raise your hand if this applies to you. How many of you have bought organic food or fair trade products in the past month? Just raise your hand. Oh, wow, great. Okay. How many of you have decided to ride a bike or take public transportation when you could have driven? Amazing. Great. How many of you have bought an electric vehicle or installed solar panels in the past year or so? Amazing. Wow. A lot of people here. So I want you to keep that in mind, okay? Um, as I go through the talk. I have one more question and just yell it out if you have an answer to it. Why did you do these things? All of them cost potentially more time, energy, and money in some cases. Why did you do these things? No backup plan. Sorry. Why is it the right thing to do? Because it's sustainable. That's one reason. It's sustainable. What are some other reasons? It's healthy. It's good for your own health. Perhaps also good for other people's health and the world's health. Yeah. Other reasons?
Because I cannot advocate for it if I don't do it myself.
You can't advocate for it if you don't do it yourself. Yeah. 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 You have to walk the walk if you talk the talk. Yeah. Any other reasons? There's no viable alternative in some cases, perhaps. Yeah. There's no planet B, the sustainability reason. Yeah. So I'm going to argue that many of those reasons that you do this, that you overcome certain obstacles, maybe it costs more money, maybe it takes more energy from you, maybe it takes more time, is the same reason people should install Linux. That's going to be the main argument of my talk today. And that's the sort of main thrust for this project. I'm going to do that in 4 parts. The first part, why do this, which I'm titling This Is Not Fine. Um, Second part, what about the past project, the Blauwang for Foss? How does it relate? Um, the third part is actually the new project, this opt-in, opt-out, opt-green. And the final part is how to contribute. So many of you know the This Is Fine dog sitting in a burning house, right? Um, Here's the continuation of that strip. If you just wait long enough, right? Um, Suddenly the dog is also on fire. This is not fine. Oh my God, everything's on fire. What the hell is my problem? Okay. Now, any of you have seen my talks. The topic of why we're doing this is familiar. Anyone who reads the news knows why sustainability and the climate crisis is a crisis. But just to go over that in brief. So this is from April this year. The Antarctic jumped to a staggering almost 40 degrees Celsius. This is the coldest place on Earth. Um, Penguins, so I'm going to refer to penguins a few times in these slides, both in terms of the endangered animal who are at high risk to evolve to accommodate these changes, as well as penguins in the sense of Linux. Ocean temperatures are at the highest they've ever been recorded. This is just from 3 days ago. Copernicus, the EU agency measuring climate change, has reported this is the hottest year ever. There are children who are born today or this year. This is going to be the coldest summer they ever experience. It's really that hot, and it's really our fault, right? This is a Mastodon toot. You can't quite read the graph, but it's showing in various metrics that in every possible way, the data is going up with one exception. So the temperature, global temperature is going up, the sea levels are rising, the time of year when the cherry blossoms bloom is earlier and earlier, et cetera. The one exception is the sea ice, which is melting. This is from a climate scientist in the UK. States everywhere we look, the climate is changing rapidly. These changes are not natural, right? We are doing this. We are causing this change. Oh my God, Jesus, what the was I even thinking? There was no reason to let it last this long and get this bad. Okay. We've known about this for a long time. This is an article from a magazine called Popular Mechanics from 1912. This is already about 60 years after the first scientist, Eunice Newton Foote, discovered that CO2 caused the temperature to rise when interacting with the sun and took longer to cool down. Her research was first presented by a man and only later published under her name. In 1912, it was commented that adding CO2 tends to make the air a more effective blanket for the Earth and to raise its temperature. This effect may be considerable in a few centuries. Okay, we're 1 century later, and it is considerable. What does this have to do with us here? So this is a graph that I've used in pretty much every talk I've given. It's from the Association of Computing Machinery, where they look at the role of ICT in climate change. And it's a really nice report. It's very short. It gives a nice summary of the state of things. The comparison that they make, that the average of the CO2 emissions from the ICT sector is roughly on a par with the aviation industry. The main contributors to this are training of large language models that was discussed a little bit earlier this morning. The number of internet connected devices, often for short-term use. So they're not designed to last very long. It's another major contributor. Blockchain technology is a major contributor. And if nothing changes in the next 30 years, it will become a third of all CO2 emissions. Now, not all of this is bad, right? Some digital technology is replacing worse polluters. But the emissions are rising so fast that this policy report comments that computing can help mitigate climate change, but it must first cease contributing to it first. And I'm going to go over that in a bit more detail. This is another meta-analysis of some research scientists, Freitag et al. From 2021, looking at the different models predicting CO2 emissions from the ICT sector. What you notice here is, although some go up much more quickly, some go up more gradually, they're all going up, right? We're increasing our CO2 footprint. This is a report from the International Energy Agency looking at the energy consumption worldwide, and this is for the ICT sector. They find that it's about 8.5% of the energy consumption comes from the ICT sector, and they break it down in terms of different areas. And you can see here that the manufacturing is about half of all of the energy consumption driven by ICT. This is another report. This is from Apple's own environmental report, where they look at their CO2 emissions of the entire company. And they report that production is about 75% of their CO2 emissions. This is a nice graph from a Swiss university comparing different devices in terms of their usage and production costs. And you see here that desktop and laptop computers have an overall higher CO2 emissions associated with them compared to tablets, smartphones, and printers. Tablets are incredibly efficient, surprisingly. But you see in all of them that production, the orange part of the bar plot, is the most of the CO2 emissions associated with these devices. So related to this, the International Council of Academies of Engineering and Technological Sciences, which is a large group of different engineering groups, research groups, said that we need to introduce judicious policies for the replacement of ICT equipment due to the high energy consumption from manufacturing of ICT, which represents half of the total, and the high environmental impact of ICT decommissioning, which is then in this slide. And this is the topic that Joanna presented yesterday about e-waste. You can see here a end-of-life treatment center in Ghana, where our products, when they end up in a end-of-life treatment center, many of them don't, they are then broken apart and precious metals are taken out of them. Here you see a picture of the cables being burnt to get the metals out from inside them. In the best case scenario, this pollutes the air, the water, the soil, and harms the health of the people working there. Worst case scenario, people are scavenging for toxic metals, which cause serious bodily harm. And the production of devices requires rare earth minerals that often come from places like the Congo, where people live in miserable conditions, and there are human rights violations with child labor to get the cobalt out of the earth to make our batteries. Okay. In 2015, about 10 years ago, Achim Steiner from the UN Environmental Program commented there's a tsunami of e-waste. At that point, there was about 45 million tons of e-waste produced. If you were to make Eiffel Towers out of that, that would be the equivalent of 4,500 Eiffel Towers. If you stack those Eiffel Towers, it'd be 17 times higher than Mount Everest, right? It's a lot of e-waste. It's only increased since then. In 2022, it was about 15 million tons more, and it's not going down. Only about 20% of e-waste actually gets recycled. And although it's only 2% of the e-waste in landfills, it contributes about 70% of the toxic waste. Okay. So before I go to the next slide, just to sum up, manufacturing has a huge cost. E-waste has a huge cost, okay? Keep those two things in mind. So what about the Blauer Engel for Forst? So many of you may not know about the Blauer Engel for Forst project. It was the previous government-funded project from the Umweltbundesamt, the German Environment Agency, related to the Blue Angel Eco label. The Blue Angel Eco label, the first version was published in 2020. The newest version was updated in 2024. Initially, it was just for desktop software. It's now been revised to include mobile apps and server software. And it has three main categories: resource and energy efficiency, potential hardware operating life, and user autonomy. And the project Blauer Engel for Forst recognized, so this is a more detailed list of those three main categories, recognized that the transparency and the user autonomy criteria were very compatible with what free and open source software is already doing. Okay. Of course, there are ways that we can improve, but we're already meeting many of these criteria. Um, and one of the ways that the criteria, one of the things it recognizes is that there's environmental harm when you have vendor dependency. When you have vendor dependency for control over the software that you depend on, when you have software that is increasingly adding new features and becoming more and more bloated, that you have hardware obsolescence, planned obsolescence in the software, which results in requiring new and more powerful devices. That's one of the reasons why the requirements for the resource and energy efficiency say that if you want to be eco-certified, it can't increase by more than 10% in the energy consumption of that software while it's eco-certified. It's to prevent this need for ever more powerful devices. Because those more and more powerful devices mean that older devices that aren't as powerful get discarded as e-waste, or maybe the software support is no longer there, it gets discarded as e-waste, and new devices are produced and shipped unnecessarily. So I'm going to focus on a couple of aspects of that. So one is about the user autonomy of deciding how your software works, as well as the freedom for advertisement and tracking. This is in Windows 11 now. You're going to have advertisements, whether you want it or not, in the start menu. That is something you can't turn off, and it consumes energy. These changes result over time in having a situation like this. This is a report from the Umweltbundesamt, the German Environment Agency, comparing different word processors when doing the exact same thing. They don't identify which word processors were tested. You can probably guess. On the right, it's a proprietary word processor. On the left, it's a open source word processor. And again, to do the exact same thing, the proprietary ones consume 4 times the energy, okay, to do the exact same thing. Um, Again, going back to tracking and advertisements, this is a report about the energy consumption driven by unnecessary or unwanted data use. It was only for the EU, and they estimated that about 60% of people would like to turn off ads and tracking if they could, but they can't, resulting in energy consumption in a year of about the city of Lisbon or Turin. Okay, just by having that turned off would save that much energy, and this is for something that people don't want, right? So user autonomy, having control of your software, This can result in major energy savings once you scale it up, and results in devices being able to be used for longer. Hardware, so continuity of support is another criteria of the Blue Angel. Software support can greatly influence how long we can use devices. This is an estimate of how much e-waste will be produced by Windows 11 dropping support for devices that currently run Windows 10. It's about 250 million computers. And Intel chips in Mac devices and Apple devices is slowly being phased out. I think the first ones have been phased out for the newest Mac OS update. And some of these devices are from 2019, 2020. Some of the devices here are probably similarly about that old. They're not that old. These are very powerful devices. The loss of that support means that in Apple's case, they'll get 2 years of security updates, and then the hardware becomes e-waste unless you do something about the software running on it. Um, so these are like the in the Blaue Engel for Voss. Um, One of the things that we were focusing on is taking the criteria of the Blue Angel to free and open source software communities, to developer communities, and trying to promote the eco certification of free and open source software, since we're already meeting many of these criteria, and perhaps we can influence things like green public procurement, get more free software into public offices. And to promote it amongst consumers who might be interested in these kinds of things. But consumers seem to be aware of the problem, but maybe not aware of the solution. So this is a Eurobarometer poll from, I think, 2022, if I remember correctly, in which reasons for purchasing a new device were given that 30% said the performance of their old device had significantly deteriorated, and about 20% said certain applications or software stopped working on their old device. So they're recognizing the problem. And interest in sustainable products is increasing. This is a Economist report and from the WWF about the interest, the searches for sustainable software or sustainable products has gone up globally and across many different countries. And this is largely driven by environmental activists. Okay. And one of the things that I was asking is how many people, how many end users actually know that there is something like the Blue Angel, that there is this idea of sustainable software and eco certification for software, that it actually means something, and that they can do something about this, that they don't have to discard their devices because it's getting too slow and the software isn't working, if they know that there's other software they can run on their devices. So to sum up the two past sections, which really motivated the writing of this proposal, manufacturing is a huge has huge environmental costs. Users seem to be aware of problems, but maybe not solutions. And when I was sitting there writing the proposal, and thank you to the KDEV for supporting me in this process. Thank you to Nate's mom, who actually gave really great content feedback on one of the early drafts of the proposal. Decided on writing a proposal, which we're calling Opt Green, Sustainable Software for Sustainable Hardware. And the idea is to take what we're doing in KDE Eco, to take what the Blue Angel is doing in their criteria for certifying software as sustainable, and take it directly to end users, and in particular, those end users that we're calling eco consumers. So all of those people who are willing to take a little bit extra time, a little bit extra energy, maybe spend a little more money, as many people here are willing to do for other products, and align that with their digital products to raise the issue that you might go and buy, I'm trying to think of the word, organic food at a market. I bought this on the way here, actually. There's a little market down the street. Um, and not think that the phone that you throw away is also something you should be considering, right? And once you can bring those two things together, we might see that people are more and more interested in installing free software in order to keep their devices in use for longer. Because we're focusing on this particular target audience, we're interested in design. So this is something that when writing the proposal, I thought, okay, how are we going to address this people? And my sense is, sitting in Europe in Western Europe with a North American background, that design really plays an important role. Now, someone brought up a question yesterday: what are we doing to address global communities? Now, this design approach may be different in different communities. If you are interested in the topic and you want to get involved, you're more than welcome to give us feedback, give ideas, so that we can tailor our design for the communities that you want to address. But this is a brand brief that our designer made, um, giving some guidelines for the kind of visual imagery that we want to use in this project, so that we can attract eco consumers to free software using a visual language that might be familiar or attractive to that particular audience. We're revamping the website. Let's see. Okay, I have plenty of time. We're revamping the website. Again, we have an existing website from the previous project, the Blauw We're now reshaping it for this new project, and trying to incorporate past initiatives into it. We have three main areas: Be Green, this is for end users; Grow Green, these are for advocates who want to promote free software in terms of sustainability; and Make Green, which is for developers. And that's a continuation of much of the work we are doing in the past project, which I'll come to in just a second. We have campaigns and advertisements. I have some pamphlets here. Here's a digital version of it, which we want to distribute at various events. We have a budget for ads. We want to actually take out ads in magazines and print media to promote this in communities that may not be as active on social media, or may be active in social media and in these other places. So we want to try to attract people who might be outside of our normal tech bubbles. If you have ideas for advertisements, please be in touch. We'd love your feedback. We're going to eco festivals, open air markets, organic shops. We want to take what we're doing in KDE Eco, what the free software world is doing, and take it directly to people that we're defining as eco consumers, people who might be interested in sustainability aspects in other areas of life, and trying to bring them into this digital sustainability world. This is actually a picture from April in Berlin. It's a eco festival with, I think, 20,000 attendees. Um, This is from the Lange Nacht der Wissenschaft, the Long Night of Sciences. We had a table at the Umweltbundesamt with the German Environment Agency, together with various other projects from the Umweltbundesamt. This is, various devices running KDE and free software. We have some nice conkeys here from Albert's mom, a GNU over here, some pamphlets. This is a computer. I have it here. It's from 2003. It was updated 2 days ago. It's running up-to-date gcomprix on it. Now, I don't bring this necessarily to say, hey, you should use this computer. But the point that I'm trying to make when bringing this there is that there's no other operating system you could run on this if it's not free software. There's nothing. The only option you have is free software. And in fact, this was running Haiku. Haiku actually ports a lot of KDE software, which is nice. So I was able to have some games running on it with gcomprix. It was a great tool to get people interested. Kids would see it and immediately come to it and start playing. And then I could talk to the parents about digital sustainability and walk them through the pamphlet and how free software addresses many of the issues about hardware obsolescence. One of the things we're doing is demoing, and I put in here parentheses, unsupported hardware running free software. Now, the unsupported part, this e-waste part, is both important in terms of what is already e-waste. That's the unsupported, or what would be e-waste. That's the unsupported part. So people have devices, perhaps at home, that they just have lying there in their closet or in their drawer. They don't know what to do with it. I've actually learned since starting this project that many people save those devices because they have data on it, which I found really interesting. It's very different than how I think of these things, but they think of them as archives of their data, which is an obstacle for when trying to put new software on it. So one of the hooks we have is you can take your old device and give it a new life. In fact, we're using this Bring It Back to Life as a sort of a catch to bring people to these events. And one of the reasons is because free software excels in this area. We've been doing, I have to go quickly. We've been doing this for so long. It's a blue ocean. No one else is in this space, but it's not only about unsupported hardware. New hardware that's running Linux means you can run that hardware to the end of the hardware operating life, right? It's not just about old devices. It's also new devices that are running Linux will run for longer. I'm just going to take another 2 or 3 minutes and then I have 15. Okay. One of the things we want to do is visibility. Cornelius brought this up in his presentation. This is a screenshot from the KDE Eco lab. This is the remote access that was mentioned yesterday in the sustainable software goal. We can now run from GitLab a usage scenario script to get energy consumption reports back for developers, also for end users, by pointing out the transparency that we're doing in KDE in terms of our energy consumption. The documentation we're putting in the website, this is from Ocular's Eco tab. If you're interested in the topic of measurement, we're going to have a BOF on Monday, tomorrow at 3. Please come by. There's a lot to do here. There's a lot of interesting things we can do, and I'll come back to that in a second. We're running workshops. So when we do these events where we're presenting pamphlets and stuff, we're trying to have a workshop coming right afterwards. So this is one. So we've already had 4 workshops. This is going to be a monthly workshop that we're doing at a culture/yoga center in Berlin, trying to do outreach to people we think might be interested in the topic of sustainability but haven't thought about it in the digital space. This is currently in planning. We'll probably start in October with once a month. People know they can go there on a Friday evening at 8 o'clock. There's a community kitchen serving food. It's very popular. There's usually about 30, 40 people from the neighborhood who come by, and we can offer support. This is one initiative of many in Berlin. I've since learned that Berlin actually has a really strong repair cafe culture that is actually doing this kind of stuff already, and we're trying to network them in order to build a network within Berlin. We would love to take this outside of just one place and do it in many places. So if you're interested in this topic, you want to get involved, please be in touch. We would like to expand this so it's not just a couple of people in Berlin, but it's potentially global. And as Nicole pointed out, Nicole has done some amazing work doing outreach to schools, events in Hanover, the first, hopefully first of many, where we're teaching children how to revive what would be e-waste to keep devices in use. And this is good for the environment. It's good for actual penguins. It's also good for Linux, right? There are many reasons. This is really one of those areas where I think we can really have an impact. I think the sustainability issues around manufacturing are, as we saw, huge. And I actually think it's one of those areas, I was thinking about it, where, what's the term? When blanking on the term, backfire. When you have a certain amount of efficiency gains, often that means you then use things more, that you end up consuming more because of those efficiency gains. But I actually think device longevity is not one of those areas. If you keep a device in use, you're not going to buy a new device. Most people aren't. Most people are just happy to keep using that device. So it's not an area where I think that it means people will consume then 2 or 3 times more devices, potentially, but they'll keep using a device. And if we can keep devices in use, so all of those estimates are based on an assumption of 5 years of operating life. If we can keep devices in use for 8 years, 10 years, that's a huge savings when you scale it up to users in terms of energy and CO2 emissions. Okay, how can you contribute? We have a BOF. There are many topics to discuss. I have 3 in particular, but I'll just mention. So design, documentation, this is the Eco tab, things like minimal system requirements, discussions about that, organizing workshops, campaigns. We're having this idea of an oldest hardware competition. Who can run KDE Plasma on the oldest piece of hardware? I don't know what the prize is yet, but I have to think about it. Marketing, we're thinking about measuring different software products and doing some marketing out of that to show energy consumption and different products for that. Translation would be really helpful. We would like to take this to many places, these kinds of pamphlets, organize events. We need translators. 2 things I would like to point out in particular. This Eco tab is an idea that we've been discussing for a while. Actually, a lot of work has already been done on it. It just needs a couple of extra steps to make it across the finish line. We're almost there. We have so much. that if someone wants to help out with this, it would be great. We can get this into KDE software where we can include information about the sustainability aspects of free software, including things like Blue Angel certification and energy consumption reports. And design. If you're interested in design, we have an amazing designer, Anita, who's doing great work, but we would like to get more people in the community involved to make really beautiful. Katie's already doing such amazing work making the software beautiful. I would love some help making some of our materials beautiful in this particular project. And then we have a measurement BOF. And a couple of things we want to talk about there is this KDE Eco lab, this energy consumption measurement lab, KDE Eco test, which I'll talk about in just a second, as well as ideas like the Eco CI tool from Green Coding Solutions. They've actually been very helpful with setting up our lab. Arna came to many of our sprints, helped us set up our lab. They're designing their own tooling for measuring software. They're also designing tooling to measure the embodied carbon of software development to get an idea of how much CO2 emissions are associated with the development of software itself. And this is a tool that's actually been, Arna made a merge request. There's some discussion about how KDE can integrate it. I'd be interested to know if developers would actually be interested in this. Come to the BOF, discuss it with me in the breaks. I would love your feedback. And usage scenario scripting, this came up in the goals discussion yesterday. Selenium is a great tool for many things, also for energy consumption measurements, but also KDE Eco test, which doesn't require access to the source code, is another such tool. So this is the KDE Eco lab. I'm just gonna skip over this. And the measurement BOF, this is KDE Eco test. It's an emulation tool designed with help from Emmanuel from Gcompris, who has worked on trying to make the emulation tooling easier to use so that it's more accessible to people to make scripts so that we can emulate user behavior to get energy consumption reports. And I just have a couple of open thoughts. I didn't know where to put these in the slides. And there are two in particular that I think I'm very interested in. How low is too low for minimum hardware requirements, right? Plasma is not going to run on this. Like KDE software does. It's ported. Haiku is the operating system. Haiku is one of the places where the 90s are still alive. It's incredible, actually, how much they can do. Do we want to do that? And I'm guessing no. I mean, this is old hardware, right? But maybe we do, or maybe we want to think about it. Or maybe we want to think about consciously, where do we want to make the cutoff? Where do we want to say as a community, no, we think lower than this is just not worth our energy because we're a limited resource here. But maybe we want to go further back, or maybe it's not that hard to do, or maybe things like PinePhone is going to require us to go back. So maybe this is something I want to think about. How low is too low? What about design decisions like having UEFI as a requirement, right? What is that going to exclude? That's fine. It's a totally valid decision to make, but it's going to exclude a lot of hardware. Is that what we want to do for what we're doing here, or do we want to do something else? I think these are questions we should ask. Download for updates. If we have 3 GB downloads, I know that's not an issue long term, but right now it is with this immutable OS. That's going to exclude a lot of populations where they don't have good internet, right? Is this the kind of thing we want to do, or do we want to support those communities in what we're doing? Of course, Plasma can be ported, can be included in other distros that are focusing on these things. But what do we want to do as a community? What do we want to focus on? And another thing is improving performance on lower spec hardware. This came up in the chat room, idea of documenting what improves responsiveness and resource usage, things that you can turn on and off. Maybe Balu can be turned off on lower spec hardware to increase to give more resources for other things. Is there a way we can have an automated system to identify some of these things? And even better, can we have an automated system that then matches these, improvements to the responsiveness with just a click of a button? Do we want to do something like that? This would allow us to then keep supporting older hardware that has lower spec and give us features that are, for the newest hardware, if we want that, if we want to offer that, right? So these are some of the questions I just had some open thoughts about. I'm going to leave it at that, and then we can do a few questions.
Okay, so as a Plasma developer, I would love to have such a dashboard, at least to have a tap on, do we improve things or do we regress things? I have a question though about hardware because software, yeah, it's one of part of the puzzle, but we still have problem with hardware. For example, I've got a laptop, and because of my butterfingers, I dropped it, and I have now crack in my display. I want to replace it, but there is no way how I can do it. And so basically, my question is: does the EU have some legislature for things such as right to repair or other plans or other um, some motions to pass such law? So basically, like in the US, there's Louis Rossmann who's advocating for right to repair, and I was wondering if the EU also has something like this, because yeah, software is it's one part of the puzzle, but hardware is much a bigger problem, and I believe that it still needs to be somehow to tackled.
So the project is focused mostly on the software aspect, sustainable software for sustainable hardware. Actual right to repair legislation, I know there is some. I don't know the details of it. I bet you someone here does. Yeah.
There is this due to this legislation for right to repair, there is this repairability index for hardware, especially in the context of France. So if you buy and purchase new equipment, you can make like an informal decision and see for how long your hardware will be supported in a way that you will have an access to repairing manuals, to spare parts, and also for the guarantee. So this movement and this like awareness is growing, especially in Europe. But also what KDE Eco is doing here, raising awareness among like the end users in terms of like making more sustainable and aware choices. I think it's also extremely important. Legislation is one thing, but also from the bottom is extremely important to educate the end customers.
So our person will not this laptop is easily repairable, and like most people just look at the laptop price and buy it. Like they won't even think about, hey, do I need to repair it, etc. So
Maybe just one thing. I think we have to wrap up in a second. Maybe just one thing, a final comment. There are various hardware producers, Slimbook, Frameworks, Fairphone, et cetera, that are trying to at least think of some of these things in terms of not having the hardware have batteries glued on. I know Slimbook, I was talking with them the other day, and they have a lot of parts that they can repair if you have a broken component. They can repair many of these things. Frameworks has this whole modular idea. Fairphone has a modular approach. So I think there are things that are related that actually are KDE is in touch with. And we can actually bring up some of those things when we're reaching out to people of the hardware providers that we know are doing things better. But there is a whole world out there that's another.
I have a question about what territory all this is applying to, because you said you had, for example, a budget for advertising and for that. I'm guessing this is only for Germany, because it's no, you. So you could actually publish an advertisement in a Spanish newspaper, for example, or if there were the budget for it.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
As far as I know, there's no. I don't remember what it was, but here, I don't. There's no restriction on where we spend that money for the advertisements,
Right.
as long as it's related to the project. We have to justify why we're spending it there. Yeah. And I would love to do something. I mean, I keep thinking about Firefox with their New York Times 2-page. We could do something like that. Maybe not that, but we can do something that's high impact. We have a budget.
So if there's an event in another country and we want to do flyers or stuff like that,
We have a budget for it. Yeah. Related to this project. That's for the funding. Yeah.
what's that?
Yeah.
So basically related to the comment before. So in my opinion, even before repairing broken stuff, there's the issue that the electronic devices, at least for me, everything still works, but the batteries are worn down. And I don't get new batteries anymore. So because of the batteries worn down, I need a new device. That sucks.
Yes, that's a huge issue, and that's why it's important not to glue them on, and it's important to have devices that can replace batteries. I mean, yeah. So the comment for the people online is that also the way the software, the demands of the software on the hardware will also wear down the battery more quickly. That's another argument for efficiency and in software development.